Hello and welcome to the lesson on changing the subject of a formula. And this lesson will cater to some of the basic or simple formulae. What are the things that we'll learn in this lesson? First, we'll try and understand what do you understand by the subject of a formula. Then we'll know what is it to rearrange and change the subject of the formula. And finally, we'll learn how to change the subject of some simple basic formulae. Let's get going then. Let us start this particular math lesson with an example of grammar or English. Here's a sentence. The dog ate a turkey. What do you think is the subject of this sentence? Clearly, you can identify the subject, right? In this case, it is the dog. Now, here's the question. Is it possible for you to change the subject of this sentence without changing the meaning of the sentence? Yes, right? It is possible, provided we write this sentence in passive voice, right? So if I write it in this form, our turkey was eaten by the dog, right? You have changed the subject to the turkey now, okay? Our turkey by not changing the meaning of the sentence, right? So it is possible that in grammar, you can always change the subject of a sentence by writing it the other way around. The same is the case of a formula, a mathematical formula. But for that, we need to first understand what do we understand by the subject of a formula. Well, in case of a formula, the subject is a letter on its own on one side of the equal to sign. For example, if we have an equation which is y equals to x minus 3, then which is the letter on its own entirely on one side of the equal to sign? That's y, right? So y is the subject of this particular equation or this particular formula. What about this E equals to mc squared, the famous formula, right? Which is the letter which is on its own on one side of the equal to sign? In this case, it is E. So that is the subject of the formula. Now, to understand how to rearrange and change the subject of the formula, let's take these simple examples. We all know that 10 equals to 2 times 5. Is it possible for you to write the above equation in two different ways? One in terms of 5 and the other in terms of 2. Think about it. Well, it's quite clear that if 10 equals to 2 times 5, then without changing the meaning of the relationship between 10, 2 and 5, we can always write 5 as 10 divided by 2 and 2 as 10 divided by 5, right? It's the same thing. We are saying the same thing, except that in the first case, we have made 10 on its own on one side of the equation. In the second and the third case, we have made 5 and 2 on their own, okay, one side of the equation. So while in the first example, 10 was the subject, in the second one, 5 is the subject, and the third one, 2 is the subject, because that's on its own, right? That number is on its own. So it is possible to change the subject of any formula or any relationship or any equation just by rearranging the terms or the numbers involved, correct? Let's look at this from an algebra point of view. So it's given that x equals to y multiplied by z. So you can draw parallel from the example on the left. How can you make y the subject of the formula and z the subject of the formula? As you can see, if x equals to y times z, then y will be equal to x over z, correct? And z will be equal to x over y, x divided by y, right? So while in the first case, x was the subject, in the second case, y is the subject, and in the third case, z is the subject, because these are the letters on their own on one side of the equal to sign, right? So it is possible to change the subject of the formula, and that's what we'll learn in today's lesson. We'll try and understand how to change subject of some simple formula. Okay, let's take one more example. If 10 equals to 4 plus 6, how can you write the above equation in two different ways? One in terms of 4 and the other in terms of 6. So without changing the relationship between 10, 4, and 6, which in this case addition, how can I write 4 in terms of 10 and 6? 4 equals to 10 minus 6 and 6 equals to 10 minus 4. That's as simple as that. So while in the first case 10 was the subject, in the second case 4 is the subject and third case 6 is the subject, because these are the numbers on their own on one side of the equal to sign, right? On the same lines, if we are given x equals to y plus z, how can you make y the subject and z the subject? Okay, you can always look at the left, the example on the left to take inspiration. But even if you don't have that example, it's quite easy, right? If x equals to y plus z, then I can write y as x minus z. So while in the first case x was the subject, when I write y equals to x minus z, y becomes the subject. And likewise, we can write z equals to x minus y, wherein z is the subject, because the letters are on their own on one side of the equal to sign. So what's the best way to change the subject of any formula? Well, let's say we are given y equals to x plus 5, and we need to make x the subject of the formula. The first thing we need to do is try to pin down what we need to make the subject of the formula. In this case, we need to make x the subject of the formula. So I'll just highlight x with a different color so that I know that whatever I do, I need to make sure that x goes on one side of the equal to sign on its own. So this is an easy example. Okay, so now because I need to make x the subject of the formula, and we have a plus 5 on the same side as we have x right now, I need to just get rid of the plus 5. It's like solving simple equations, right? We have done solving simple equations. So all I need to do is subtract 5 from both sides. So the plus 5 and minus 5 on the right hand side, okay, get eliminated, as in it is 0 plus 5 and minus 5 is 0. So we are left with y minus 5 on the left hand side and x on the right hand side. So we know that x is on its own on one side of the equal to sign, which means you have indeed changed the subject to x. So the final answer is x equals to y minus 5. So we started with y equals to x plus 5, but we have now changed the subject to x. Okay, x equals to y minus 5. Let's take one more example. If y equals to 3x, how do we make x the subject of the formula? So the first rule or first step is to pin down x with a some marking. Okay, so let's highlight it with a different color in this case. I need to ensure that x is on its own on one side of the equation, and I need to transfer everything onto the other side. So in this case, we have 3 on the same side as x, but 3 is getting multiplied to x, correct? So to get rid of 3, I need to do the inverse operation, which in this case is divide, right? So if I divide by 3 on both sides, I'll be left with x on the right hand side, because 3 divided by 3 is 1. So x is on its own on the right hand side. And on the left hand side, I'll be having y divided by 3. As you can see, we have already changed the subject to x equals to y divided by 3, right? We have changed the subject to x this time. So now that we have understood the basics of changing the subject of any formula, let's try and understand how do we change the subject of a one-step and two-steps equations. Let's begin with one-step equation. So in this case, how do we make x the subject of the formula, right? So let's start with the example on the left, y equals to x minus 5. Because I need to change the subject to x, I will highlight x with a different color so that I know that x, that highlighted letter, has to be on one side with everything else going on to the other side. Because we have a minus 5 on the same side as that of x, the inverse operation of minus is plus. So I'll add 5 on both sides of the equation so that I'll be left with y plus 5 on the left hand side of the equation, and x will be on its own on the right hand side of the equation. Because x is on its own, we already changed the subject of this formula to x. So your final answer is x equals to y plus 5. Okay, how about the example on the right? Y equals to 5 minus x. We need to make x the subject of the formula. So I will highlight x with a different color. Correct? Now I need to ensure that everything apart from x goes onto the other side. But please remember, we will not, if even if I take 5 onto the left, I'll still not be left with x on the right hand side because I'll be left with a minus x. Whereas to make the x the subject of the formula, I need to have x on its own, not even a minus 1, for example. Minus x is the same as minus 1 times x. So what I'll do is, rather than moving 5 in this case, I'll first try and move minus x onto the other side. Okay, so what is the inverse of minus x? I need to do a plus x. So what I'll do is I'll add plus x on both sides of the equation. So on the right hand side, minus x and plus x will cancel out, as in minus x and plus x is 0. So we'll be left with y plus x on the left and 5 on the right. Now I understand, okay, you are saying, well, this is not helped our purpose because x is not on its own on one side of the equation. Yeah, I understand. But from this point, okay, it's easier for me to make x on its own because now we have a plus x on the left hand side. In the original equation, we had a minus x on the right hand side, right? So now that we have a plus x on the left hand side, it's easy to move y on the other side by doing the inverse of operation. Okay, so to negate plus y on the left hand side, we do minus y on either side. So plus y and minus y on the left cancel out to become 0. You're left with x on the left hand side. And on the right, we have 5 minus y. So we indeed have x on its own on one side of the equation. And hence, we have changed the subject of the formula to x. The final answer is x equals to 5 minus y. Let us now understand, how do I change subject in a two-step equation? Okay, two-step equations. So the first example is y equals to 3x plus 5. What do we need to change the subject to? We need to change it to x. So let's highlight x first of all. So y equals to 3x plus 5. We need to transfer everything apart from x onto the left hand side now. First of all, let's transfer the plus 5. Okay, because 3 is multiplied to x. So without having transferred the plus 5 first, I cannot transfer the 3. So to negate a plus 5, the inverse operation is minus 5. So I'll do minus 5 on both sides of the equation. On the right hand side, plus 5 and minus 5 makes a 0. So you're left with 3x on the right and y minus 5 on the left. Now it's easy to shift the 3 on the left hand side. In 3x, 3 is getting multiplied to x. So to get rid of 3 on the right hand side, I need to divide both sides by 3. So you are left with x on its own because 3 divided by 3 is 1. So on the right hand side, you are left with x on its own. And on the left hand side, we have y minus 5 divided by 3. So y minus 5 divided by 3 will be on the left and x will be on its own on the right. And now we have already changed the subject to x. As you can see, x is on its own on one side of the equation. So your final answer in this case is x equals to y minus 5 divided by 3, right? Okay, now let's check how would we change the subject of the equation on the right. Now, how is the left-hand side equation different than the one on the right? On the left, 3 was multiplied to only x, and after that, 5 was added to it. But if you look at the equation on the right carefully, it is x plus 5 in the brackets, which is getting multiplied by 3, which means the 3 is not only multiplied to x, but it is also multiplied to 5. So in this case, okay, it will be wise to first transfer the 3 because 3 is getting multiplied to both x as well as 5. So we'll first inverse 3. 3 getting multiplied, inverse of that is divide. So first step is to divide by 3. If I divide by 3, you'll be left with x plus 5 on the right hand side and y divided by 3 on the left hand side. Correct? Now, if I need x on its own on the right hand side, the easiest way to do is get rid of the 5 on the right, which is getting added to x plus 5, right? So to negate that, I need to do minus 5 on both sides. So now I'll be left with x on its own on the right hand side. And on the left, we have y divided by 3 minus 5. So here's your new equation with x as the subject. X equals to y divided by 3 minus 5. Let's take a couple of more examples. On the left, y equals to x plus 2 divided by 5. Now in this case, the x plus 2 entirely is divided by 5. It's not only x divided by 5, it's x plus 2 divided by 5. Unlike the equation on the right, where only x is getting divided by 5 and then 2 is added separately. So for the equation on the left, we need to first get rid of 5 because 5 is divided, gets 5 is the divisor for both x and 2, right? So both of them are getting divided by 5. The first step is to get rid of 5. Because it is getting divided and the inverse of division is multiplication, the first step is to multiply both sides by 5. Correct? So we are left with 5y on the left hand side, and on the right hand side, the divided by 5 gets cancelled with the multiplied by 5, correct? Because divide by 5 and multiplied by 5 is 1. So you're only left with x plus 2. Correct? Now to make x the subject, all I need to do is transfer the 2 on the left hand side. Because the 2 is getting added on the right, the inverse of that is minus 2. Correct? So if I do minus 2 or subtract 2 on both sides, I'll be left with x on its own on the right hand side. And on the left, we'll have 5y minus 2. So your final answer with x as the subject will be x equals to 5y minus 2. Now let's see the equation on the right. How is that different? As I explained earlier, the plus 2 is done only after x gets divided by 5. So 5 is the divisor only for x, not 2. So in this case, the first step would be to transfer the plus 2 onto the left. First, let's highlight x because we need to make that as the subject. So we need to focus on that. So if I do minus 2 on both sides of the equation, on the right hand side, plus 2 and minus 2 makes a 0. So we have got rid of the plus 2. So you'll be left with only x divided by 5 on the right. On the left, on the other hand, we have y minus 2. So y minus 2 equals to x divided by 5. And now to make x on its own on the right hand side, because it is getting divided by 5, the best step would be to multiply by 5 on both sides so that the 5 gets eliminated on the right hand side and x is on its own. So on the right, the divide by 5 and multiplied by 5 gets cancelled to give you 1, which is 1x. Okay. And on the left, the 5 is getting multiplied entirely to y minus 2. Okay. Mind you, this is a silly mistake that can be committed by most of you. If you only multiply 5 by y, that will be incorrect because y minus 2 was the entire thing. Look, before we multiplied by 5, the left-hand side entirely consists of y minus 2. So when we multiply by 5, the 5 gets multiplied to both y as well as minus 2, which means your final answer would this case be 5 brackets y minus 2 equals to x. So the new formula with x being the subject is x equals to 5 brackets y minus 2. Well, I hope you understood how do we change subject of some basic formula. In this lesson, we first understood what do you understand by subject of any formula. Then we went on to understand how can we rearrange a formula and make different letters as subject. And then we applied that formula or that rule to change the subject of some one-step and two-step equations. I hope you understood the basic way in which you can change the subject of any formula. In the next lesson, we'll understand how do we change the subject of some advanced formulae. See you then. Thank you.